I'm not going to risk sharing my screen. I did have beautiful slides, but they will have to live for another day. I think we can do this without slides and leave the panel just spotlighted. Let's start with kind of the premise of this particular webinar, which is, what does an instructional designer do? Because we get this question all the time, and the answer, I always starts with like, well, it depends, because there's so much variation, which is why I wanted to get a panel together for this and not just a single instructional designer. And especially get a panel who has this diverse experience, because while all of you have kind of experience coming from a teaching background, you've worked in different industries. Some of you are remote, some of you are hybrid, so we have this like kind of different kind of backgrounds and industries to speak to it. So if everybody could just describe like 1 or 2 typical days and some typical duties to kind of give everybody an idea of some things an instructional designer could possibly be doing. Let me pick on Ken first.
Okay, sure. So I think there really isn't a typical day, because it depends on the type of project. So I'm hybrid, right? So my target audience are mostly internal to my company, but that could mean people in a restaurant. So you're talking maybe a hostess, a server, managers, or it could be a in-person type of blended learning event where it could be like senior managers, director and VP level. So it really depends on the project, because it could be either virtual or in person. But typically we begin our day at 9 o'clock. So since I'm hybrid, sometimes I have to drive and commute, but sometimes I'm here at home. But 9 o'clock, I'll log in, and the first thing I do is just check messages. So that's email, Teams, and Monday. And I think we're going to talk a little bit more about project management here in a little bit, but I typically check those things to kind of plan out my day. And of course, I've got regularly scheduled meetings that I attend, either within the team or supporting a project. So that might be with the cross-functional project team. So kind of varies day to day, but there is structure. So I'm not working crazy hours. I don't work weekends. I don't do that type of stuff. It's pretty much Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, and then just depends if I'm working remote, if I'm working from home. So not a typical day, I would say. I'm curious to see what the others say, though.
Let's pick on McKenzie now.
Yes, we were talking about this before. We're also curious just to hear from each other too, to be like, like what's going on at all these other companies. So my title is Senior Technical Instructional Designer. And I'd say the senior bit is that my job is about half people management, not direct line management, but just kind of wrangling all the different people involved with projects. So like half my time is spent, proactively checking in with product owners, maybe collaborating with sales to put together a pricing estimate if we're going to bid for a new client. I have to meet with software developers often to review content for new courses. So those sorts of meetings. And then the other half is tech. So I am a technical trainer. So I'm developing technical training, whether that's video tutorials, labs, simulations, e-learning, VILTs, whatever format the training is. So yeah, like I said, kind of half tech, half people stuff.
Awesome. Tyler, why don't you tell us about your particular day?
Yeah, sure. And I'll agree with Ken. It is very different depending on the projects you're working on. I'm currently on a project that's going to take a year or two, maybe longer. So it is well spaced out. It's very different than, let's say, a project that's due in a month, which is like rapid fire, getting content out as quick as you can. And so I would say project is kind of dependent, or it's project dependent. And then I would say I spend a lot of my day meeting with other people. So I might be meeting with the SME. I might be building content in some of the tools. I might have a team meeting. We do fun things too that aren't work related, like happy hours and things like that, to bond as a team. Because of the industry I work in, sometimes I do have to go visit like an airport to go and watch somebody do their job and build the training around that. So that's kind of cool to do that. But I would say it is different dependent on the project and also what you're building in. Because some things you can build it quickly, some things take longer, like storyline just takes longer to build. So.
And then Alejandro will round it up with you. And then I have some follow-up questions so that we can get into some more detail on this questions.
Yeah, for sure. Can y'all hear me? Yep. Okay, great. Yeah, my day-to-day has changed since I started at this role. So I started this job like a year and a half ago. And when I first started on this role, I was doing a lot of reviewing courses, making enhancements, a lot of work in storyline and Camtasia. But what we have found is like there was a lot of need for alignment across the organization, because I'm a lead for onboarding for a bunch of countries for the sales folks and for another audience called business development. And what we noticed was like, you know, I can make these improvements to this course here and there, but nothing was really aligned. Things weren't connected, didn't make sense. I didn't know what happened before and after. So since then, my role has shifted a bit where now I do a bit more work on a strategic level to figure out what are the things that folks actually need, how does it all fit together, and then actually make improvements to the courses or make new training or job aids or whatever. So my day-to-day right now is a lot of meetings with stakeholders and subject matter experts at the beginning of my day, because I'm on the West Coast. So most folks in my company start their day East Coast hours. So they're already like got a couple of hours ahead of me. So I start my day first checking email, checking my project management tracker, which is we use Rike and Teams. And then it just kind of goes into meetings, and I'm in meetings most of my morning, kind of back to back. I do have some space here and there. But then after my lunch break is when it gets a little bit quieter and I can kind of focus on actually getting work done, because most folks are logging off. So it's kind of heavy in the morning. Luckily, I like most of the folks that I work with. So most of the time I'm energized by those meetings. I have a nice break during lunch, and then in the afternoon is when I get stuff rolling and bang, progress on my projects.
Yeah, so I love how all of those answers really highlighted the fact that this is both a people business and a like heads down strategy, independent work business. Like it's those two things which are sometimes seen as like contradictory. I think that instructional design has those components. So as a follow-up, I just kind of want you to envision, I guess, like one day in particular, and maybe walk us through like a little bit more detail. Okay, this day, this happened, because we got like the big overview there, but, and every day is going to be different. So this is just one day that may be vastly different from the next day. We already kind of established. So Tyler, can you envision a day and walk us through 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. or whatever hours you worked that day? What happened without getting into any secret, company secrets?
Sure. So I'm thinking of a specific, I'm actually kind of thinking of today a little bit is, I'm meeting sometimes with other developers and asking them questions about their projects and trying to like gain ideas from them, maybe trying to like, oh, you solutioned it this way. I didn't think about it that way. So trying to pull ideas from them. Then maybe I'm gathering with an entire team from different departments and we're talking about large projects and the updates around them there. My company specifically does design pitches. And so I actually have to pitch my ideas to the SMEs and they have to approve it. I don't just to get to do what I want to do, which is sometimes unfortunate, but we make it work. And then I will spend time digging into like documentation, looking at old files, trying to see where I can pull maybe material from or where I need to get new material. And then kind of the other part of the day is building in different tools, Storyline, Rise, video tools, things like that. I don't hear you, Allison.
Yeah.
I'm having all kinds of technical, let's see. Can you hear
We
me
just-
now?
Yeah, we just heard you. Yeah, we can hear
Okay.
you.
I was like, I'm having all kinds of unstable issues and I can't identify them. But McKenzie, will you walk us through, think about a day and walk us through morning to afternoon, open laptop to closed laptop?
Yeah, I just like pulled out my agenda. So I was like, what did I do Monday? I'm a morning person, so like my brain is melting by the end of the day, so I have to refer to my notes here. So like this is a pretty normal Monday. We start every week with a Kanban meeting. So we're agile. We meet every Monday, quick 15-minute stand up, and we just hop on Jira and go through all of our feature cards, which each feature is a project. We just update the team, and it kind of gives you like an opportunity to look ahead for the week and think about what your goals are. And it holds you accountable when you have to say it to your peers because they're going to remember the next week. So yeah, we start off with a Kanban meeting. I just finished creating 2 on-demand courses. And so Monday I was writing the marketing for those because we're going to promote them across different like internal newsletters. And we have a feed where we promote all of our customer education. So I'm doing some copywriting for that. I had a strategy meeting with one of our trainers to talk about how we're going to approach a new training project that's coming up next month. We heard from the product team that there's going to be a new product. And so we're just kind of starting early brainstorming. What's that going to mean for our team? And then the last thing, this is like the never ending administrative project that's just kind of busy work. The company I worked for changed all their branding, and it seems so silly. They changed the colors and fonts. It means I have to change every single deliverable. So I spent like hours in PowerPoint just converting PowerPoints over to the new branding because all of our training is the old branding. So it's silly, but it has to get done, and it's just kind of something if I just do a couple hours at a time, I'm chipping away at it.
Yeah, I think that's a good call out too, McKenzie. There's a lot of tedious pieces. I mean, there's a lot of strategy too. We do some high level thinking, but then we also have to caption, we have to change fiddly fonts and text. And so it's another kind of contradiction and combination of work that is really interesting, I think. Walk us through a particular day, Ken.
Sure. So this was last week, and I had my individual project that I was assigned. So we have a team of 4, and then we have our director. So my project launched last week. So I was busy making sure that was happening. And then there's glitches, right? But I'm also supporting one of my other instructional designers on her project. So on this particular day, I found myself kind of making sure that my project launch was going smoothly because there was something an issue out in the field that we had to resolve. But we did get that fixed. So I did have to work with the internal HR information systems team to kind of figure out what this bug was to kind of make sure that it went smoothly for one of our folks out in the field. And then since I was supporting someone else's project, I was doing different things. So I found myself working in Audition, which is a part of the Adobe Creative Cloud. So I was editing videos because we had interviews from people in the field that we were adding into a course in Rise. So I was editing and then adding it in Rise, and then also kind of working on some graphics at the same time. So I remember walking out of that office that day, and I was like, okay, yeah, I mean, this is like, because you kind of have like 2 like projects, they have peaks and valleys. So you have 2 kind of days, like, it's like, oh man, this kind of sucks. And then you have those days like, yeah, man, I actually enjoyed it. Like I was doing different things, like exercising different muscles and thinking about different things. So it was that day. I was like, yeah, this is kind of like one of those good, typical instructional design days. I was doing different things, working with different tools, working with different people to solve problems, right? So that was really neat. Do want to add in that since I was in the office that day, I was able to go downstairs to our gym and work out still. So it was one of those full days where I just felt like, okay, this is what I signed up to do. So not trying to sell you the pitch, but yeah, it was very fulfilling.
All right, last but certainly not least, Alejandro, give us a rundown of a day.
Yeah, I love how Ken put it about peaks and valleys, because there's days where I'm like, I feel so good about my job. I feel so confident. And other days I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just still figuring it out. But one day where I was at a peak was one day when I was working on a project that came to my desk, and to help some stakeholders figure out this part of activating a product for their customers. And then later on, I got another request for a different project from someone who works from a different part of the organization, but the project sounded very similar to that request. So I had to then go out, reach out to separate stakeholders, and just kind of learn more about that project. Come to find out that they both were trying to solve the same problem. So that what was great is I was able to bring in both folks into a conversation and just say, hey, you guys we're currently working on this. You guys just requested this. Are we trying to solve the same problem? And it turned out that they were, but they weren't talking to each other. So that was a cool opportunity to be able to break down that silo. And we all got to work on this project together. And we had more people on the project. And it was great because then we did one project instead of two. And that was a big win for me. So it was great because it was a lot of working with people. And I think I think in instructional design, making those connections and building this relationship with people really helps you improve your practice as an instructional designer. So that was a big win. Maybe I cheated with the answer because it was more than just one day, but that's just the first example that came to my mind.
I think that's a good cheat though, because that shows like a broader picture to folks, which is what we're trying to do here. We're going to move on to our second topic, which is subject matter experts, a big topic that comes up in instructional design interviews, a big topic that teachers often kind of ask about because they may be the subject matter expert and not be working with a subject matter expert in their teaching job. So, and also because we have different industries here, and that can be different in different industries. Like Tyler mentioned, having to pitch to subject matter experts, whereas some people won't have to pitch to their subject matter experts. Their subject matter experts will just be a resource. It just kind of varies. So how do you typically interact with or work with different subject matter experts? And what are some of the different relationships you build, as well as the different strategies you use for working with subject matter experts? And what would you kind of describe those relationship dynamics as being in the case of your projects? And you can pick a specific project and kind of highlight that, because I know that it may be again, it depends is the answer to all these questions, but we're just giving some examples. Ken, why don't you start us off with this one?
Sure. So to your point, Allison, it depends. It depends on the target audience, right? So this project that I was working on here recently that just launched, it was to streamline a process, right? So I was working with folks from legal, human resources, HR, information support, so some technical people. And then as the project kind of like moved along, we found that we had to bring in some more people. So everyone had like a little piece to the pie. And something that I found that I had to do was uncover that, like, well, I don't know, like if we're trying to add a little menu drop down, like I don't know how to do that. And since I'm new to the company, like I don't even know how to or who to go to. So you have to kind of figure those things out and uncover it, right? So no one's going to really tell you like go do A, B, and C. So you have to figure that out, and then you just have to be able to approach people and ask the right questions. So that's kind of what I learned from this particular project. And also, since I was working in this kind of cross-functional, internal team, they're all grown-ups and we're all trying to do the same things, right? We're trying to get this one thing done, but we all have different priorities depending on your perspective, right? So just being able to really kind of keep everybody on the same page, kind of march into the same beat, that was important. And acknowledging that yeah, like this part is done for you. So if we have questions, we'll come back to you, but you don't have to attend the next meeting, right? But you over there, like we need you. So, we kind of need you to chime in. So that's the thing, is like building those relationships and trust, and really doing what you're going to say you're going to do, and following through on that. That's very important.
Yeah, and to kind of build off that, I'm going to add in Megan's question, which is basically, Megan mentions that in interviews and like articles and stuff, it's always the, how did you work with a difficult SME? And everything makes it sound like subject matter experts are really difficult to deal with. And they are sometimes, but they also often aren't. Like in my, like, it's not that every SME is coming in like looking to make your day miserable. So I do think it's funny how it is kind of overblown there. But I would say we're also going to maybe talk a little bit in this section about like how to deal with those people who have maybe different priorities, like Ken said. And I think that is some of the difficulty. It's not usually like, oh, I had this really terrible person I had to work with. It's like I had this person who had a different priority than I had, and some strategies to kind of deal with that. Ken kind of already worked that into his answer for you, but I would say as you're answering this question and thinking about how you work with folks, that would be kind of a good thing to consider for her question too, because I thought that was a good one. Alejandro, tell me about how you work with, it sounds like you're in a lot of meetings with probably people who are stakeholders and SMEs all morning. So how are some ways that you work with your subject matter experts?
Yeah, so one of the first things I do when a request comes my way or a project gets requested is I make sure that that project has a sponsor, like executive sponsorship. So like there's support. Because early on I was working on a project that someone brought to my desk, and I thought, oh, like they must have support. And then I didn't know how like the landscape of the organization worked very hard on the project. Come to find out that it was just this person's just passion project almost. And once I delivered it, this person left the organization, and afterwards no one really wanted that project to be incorporated into onboarding. So I was like, I did all this, and it's like kind of like, for what? So now it's like anytime something comes my way, I'm like, does this have executive VP sponsorship? And then what I really lean on for working with subject matter experts is change management. I'm going to put an acronym in the chat. I use this a lot. ADKAR, I'm not sure. Yeah, I see Ken nodding his head. Stands for awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and the last one, I forget. It's like not maintenance, but it's another word that's synonym with that word that starts with R. But anyways, it's like, if I have sponsorship and support from the executive level, I can then get support from subject matter experts. So I can have, like, if I need to have a subject matter expert for a specific project, if I have support from the people who with influence, subject matter experts are much more likely to be able to support me, to get back to me on time. Or if they're not able to because they have different priorities, there's communication there with different folks. It's like, hey, like so-and-so can't do it. Someone else can step in to support the project, to move it along. But that's been a big help to kind of get projects rolling and to eliminate bottlenecks or barriers in there. So, and then subject matter experts and other stakeholders are kind of involved throughout the process. They have knowledge of like how things are rolling, even though they don't have to directly be involved in every single step of the way. So that has been something that's been a huge help with reducing friction with subject matter experts, and being kind of proactive about establishing that relationship.
That's a really great like strategy and example. I think that it kind of walks through that whole process of how your time can be like a little bit wasted if you don't do that like follow up as to who's going to benefit from this, who really wants this, and you just take the order, which I think has happened to many an ID, including myself. Like, okay, I'll do the thing, just like thinking you're being agreeable, and then you realize maybe I should have asked more.
Allison cutting out again. All right, I'm still recording. So Allison, if it's okay with you, I'm going to go ahead and answer this question. Okay.
Go ahead. Yeah, absolutely.
So the way that I work with SMEs, because I'm creating product training, I need people who are experts in the product. So I go to software developers or product owners. They help me figure out what are the most important technical skills that our clients need with these products. What are our clients going to do with it? What are some of the typical workflows? My background is not technical, so sometimes it feels like it's going to go way over my head. Like, we need a system administration course for backend configuration. I'm like, so when I meet with the software developers, I basically get into a training environment with them and ask them to like walk me through baby steps, like pretend I know nothing because I know nothing. And let's go through step by step. What would our client do with this product? Are they going to be creating email templates, generating invoices? Maybe for this piece of software, they're downloading roaming data. We work in telecom a lot. Whatever it is, I'm like, show me how you would do it. Now, what are some different ways that clients would do it? And I'm writing all this down and recording it. So basically, they hold all the knowledge. And as someone who was a history teacher for 10 years, that was definitely a shift, where it's like, now I do feel out of my element sometimes, but I'm like, that's my job, is to figure out how to take this super complex technical stuff and break it into these bite-sized pieces that anyone can understand. So those relationships with the software developers, that's like the backbone of my work. I'd say it's the most important part. I couldn't build any of the technical training if they weren't willing to work with me and set aside time to walk me through all of our different digital products.
I'm not sure if I'm cutting out again. No, here I am. Okay. I was going to say, Tyler, we'll throw it to you.
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to just probably stick with a specific example because that helps me to like talk specifically versus general. So typically on a project, I'm given like 2 layers of SMEs. The first layer is like the leaders that are associated with the request. They're usually the ones that are bringing the request to the training department. And then you have the layer of SMEs that are actually in the field executing the job. And so there's 2 different perspectives immediately. One that thinks they know what's going on in the field, and then the people that actually know what's going on in the field. And so part of the instructional design job is trying to figure out, well, how do I make both of those marry together in a training where the story isn't pitting one perspective against the other, but versus telling one single story. So I think that is a big part of the job of the instructional designer. Is you're supposed to listen very well, the active listening that everyone always talks about, and try to like hear out their story, but then also like trying to put it into words that a learner is going to understand, and trying to give the narrative that both of them are expressing, because they're both important. I would say building trust with your SMEs is really important. And I know we've kind of walked around that or said that, but don't be afraid to ask them questions. I think that SMEs love to feel smart. They love to feel intelligent. So if you ask them a question, you're like, whoa, I didn't think about that. Then they're like, wow, I helped give to this project. And so the more questions you can ask, the more you give them the opportunity to be the smart person in the room. I think that builds trust between you and them. I would say the other thing is giving them time. So like specifically, like they're going to be busy a lot of the time. And so making sure that you're trying to fit to their schedule, even though you're on a deadline and you've got to get it out, they'll give you more information if you're more adaptable to their needs than the other way around. And then, there was something else there. Oh, the one, if a SME is not great to work with. I've actually run into this before. And something I've tried to do with them is try to be empathetic to their situation. Empathy can be hard sometimes when you're seeing it from multiple perspectives, but just trying to hear out why do you think that way? Why is it that you're a little rusty? Why do you not like this team? And trying to just hear out the perspective. Maybe they've been here for a long time and they've been through a lot of change, and then you can learn about the history of the training for that. Maybe they've seen it change over time. And so I think empathy is something that I would say is important when you're dealing with somebody that's difficult to work with.
Yeah, I think I love the point that you made too about making them feel smart. And they are smart. I mean, they're subject matter experts. They are smart people quite often, usually. Especially like I know the ones I work with, like I work with people who are medical and have like a background in things that I'm like, oh, you're way smarter than me at many, many things. But I think that is such a great tip, because that is valuing what they're bringing to the project too, and building that relationship, which is, I think,
Oh, Allison, sounds off again.
how about now? Seems
Yep.
okay. I would say McKenzie and Alejandro answered it in the chat, but if you can sound off on that, Ken and Tyler, do you use any particular things to storyboard or exchange with SMEs for your sign off on your projects?
PowerPoint.
Yeah. Many times it's simplest, it's fastest. So it could be an email. It could be just to get an approval. And actually that works because then it's documented, right? But typically we'll have like some type of project charter. When it comes to storyboarding, it could either be like, Tyler said, PowerPoint. It could be Word. Like really, you don't have to do like that one thing all the time. It just kind of depends on the project, depends on the pace, the schedule. So in my line of thought is whatever's fastest and easiest and gets the job done, and I'm doing that.
Yeah, and if I could add to it, I also found that the less pretty, the better feedback and quicker feedback. Because if it's really pretty and well done and polished, they'll be more hesitant than like giving critical feedback. So just something like, hey, here's my ideas. It's rough. Go crazy. Give me as much feedback as possible. So yeah, Word, keep it simple, quick and dirty. That's the way to go.
Yeah, I think McKenzie put in the chat too that her storyboards are just a script. The same, like with mine, like every once in a while we'll do a technical demo if we have to show something that like you just can't explain, like, but then we don't get as much feedback, like you said, because people are reticent, because they're like, oh, well, this is done. That's good. Like they don't like go and give that critical piece, which is, I think, what you need in that phase. All right, we're going to move on to our third topic, which is managing these projects. So instructional designers are not project managers. Sometimes you have a project manager who works with you and sometimes you don't. But most of us have to do a lot of project management in our jobs. And Tyler mentioned already, like some projects are a month, some projects are a year. Before we get into this, in terms of like dealing with like a specific project, I'd love to hear, how many projects do you typically have that you're working on at one time? Because I think that's going to vary as well. McKenzie, how many projects are you usually working on at like a time that you have going simultaneously?
Like 3 to 5, I would say. And normally they're not all the same size. There might be like 1 or 2 big projects, some little side things I'm working on. Mm-hmm.
What about you, Ken? How many projects do you usually have going at a time?
I would say between 2 to 3, like, and McKenzie said 5, like 5 was usually the max, and then you're just ineffective. But there's always, I think someone said it earlier. Yeah, McKenzie, there's always like little side work that you're doing. So I got this one thing that just won't go away. so if I find myself needing to be productive, then I can always kind of dip into that. But right now I'm at 2 because I just finished mine off, but usually 3 is a sweet spot.
How about you, Alejandro? How many projects do you usually have going at one time?
I get a ton, but I got 2 programs that I oversee. And with those 2 programs, I break it down by quarter. So for each program, I have around 2 to 3 strategic initiatives that we call them. They're kind of like longer term projects. And within those initiatives, I might be doing a couple of different projects. That might be something that's quick and easy to bang out, like a job aid, or something else like essentially creating of a curriculum or creating of a training. So with projects, it could be like 5 to 8 at a time, and so it's spread out throughout like the whole quarter. So it gets a little overwhelming. So a a lot of project management, and a lot of time management as well. I feel like I'm at a restaurant, I'm a server, and I got a bunch of different tables, and they all came at different times, but they all got to get fed by the end of the day. So yeah, I got a lot of practice to buff up my project management skills for sure.
And then Tyler, how about you? How many things do you usually have? How many plates spinning at a time?
Yeah, the number was 3 to 5, but one thing that I wanted to specifically mention is sometimes a project will have multiple deliverables. So one project may have a RISE course, an instructor guide, and something else, a video that you have to create that sums up that entire thing. So it may not just be 5 things that I'm building. It could be multiple things within each of those projects.
Yeah, I think I might have cut out again. Nope, I'm back. Okay. I was going to say that's a good call out too, is that a project could be a curriculum that goes on for, ages and ages. A project could be like, oh, I have to make a job aid by Tuesday, because there's all different sort of situations that happen. What project management techniques, skills, day-to-day practices do you use to manage these projects, and what kind of project management challenges do you think new IDs need to be ready for? And McKenzie, we're going to start with you on this one.
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest thing is the scope document. And the reason why is with my role, I am a project manager. So I own a product line at my company. And so with that entire line of products, there's multiple products in it. There's a lot of different courses. It's a whole curriculum. And if we do any projects with any of those products, I have to run it, and I own that. And so I use the whole company. Our customer education team uses SAM, which is the successive approximation model. And it's just a different version of ADDIE, but it's a little bit more iterative. And so we have a savvy start, then there's alpha, beta, gold, these different phases of prototypes. And I use that anytime we're launching a new training initiative or if we're updating old coursework. But the reason I say the scope is the most important document, that's something that we agree on with the SMEs. So whoever the product owner is has to sign off on that scope of work before I do anything. So I'm not going to start work until they've approved of the scope. And Ale, I think this kind of relates to what you were saying before, like getting sign off from above. Like I'm not going to log a single hour working on this until I know that we have the resources. So the scope document is something I set up really early on when we do our savvy start. It's like a kickoff. And I set up timelines. What deliverables will there be? What are the objectives? What content's going in there? What are the responsibilities? Like all the way down to who's going to give me access to a training environment? Like anything you need to guide the project. And it comes in handy. For example, last week, I was days away from publishing a course. Like 3 or 4 days. I could see the finish line. It was going into its final round of edit, like this close. And I got an email from a SME being like, hey, could you add these 4 other workflows to the course? And I could be like, not in the scope. This was not agreed upon. And so I was able to say, like, I wasn't like that dismissive, obviously, but I can say, well, it's not in the scope. So yes, I can add it, but it's going to take an extra month or 2 or whatever the timeline was. So I tried to come with solutions. Like if you really want these workflows to be included, that's fine. It's just going to add on a month or 2 or however long I worked out. Or we need to renegotiate, maybe have a second phase of the project later. But the scope, it's like, it is sacred. We come back to it over and over again. When it comes to project management, that's what I refer to. It has all my deadlines, like everything we've agreed to. It's just a Word document. It's really easy. And I use that. Everyone has a copy. And then I see something about timeline in the chat.
Yeah. How do you figure out the timeline the project will take? So you're doing this scoping.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
I have to ask them, like, what do you need this training for? If it's like, oh, we have a new client who needs to be onboarded and using this product within 4 months, then I know like that's a hard deadline. And so I can work backwards from there. So normally we have some sort of launch for the product. we have other businesses that are our clients. So we work in telecom. So for example, Comcast could be a potential client. Comcast needs this training by this date. And that, yeah, for me, it's like a very hard deadline, and then I can work backwards.
And then the initial question, and I guess add on like a little bit about timeline information, because I do think that's helpful. Scoping out projects is, I think, one of the hardest parts sometimes of the job, especially when you're in that first phase, and super important, like McKenzie said. But what are some techniques and some strategies you use to do your project management, Tyler? And how do you scope those projects, and how do you manage these projects and all the stakeholders?
Yeah, I was thinking, because I'm working currently with project managers, but before I did not work with project managers. So I was trying to like think about the difference between the two. I would say one thing that it has been a joy to have as a project, to have a project manager do that I didn't have before, was like setting an agenda for a meeting. Like having to walk into the meeting and being like, okay, these are the things we have to talk about in order to hit all of our points. That's something that if you are the project manager, typically you're the one setting that up. You're the one that's dictating what's being talked about on a given meeting. So like I would pull out my OneNote on my computer, you know, a day, an hour before the meeting was supposed to start, and try to like run down an agenda real fast so that I was like, I looked like I know what I was talking about or something. And that's real. Or pretend, you know, just fake it until you make it. I would say the other thing that the timeline question is really interesting, because I'm actually dealing with this right now, is trying to figure out, well, how many deliverables can I get out by our soft launch in September? And that's a really difficult thing for me to try to do. And so like it's a lot of conversations that I'm having with the different SMEs, it's a lot of conversations I'm having with our internal team. I would say the thing that we have operated on is if it takes 1 hour of instructional time, it's like supposed to be 40 hours. If it's 1 hour of CBT, it's 80 hours. That someone threw out there at one point, and I was like, oh, that sounds nice. It never really works out that way. It's always faster. They always want it quicker than that, but that's what I was told. And so if you can get an equation like that, that's great. But typically you have to know your own pace. You have to know how fast can I build and how much time, the buffer time. Somebody mentioned that in the comments, but always add buffer time. Never just put a week. If it'll take you 3 days, always ask for a week or two. You know, that's just what I would say, is always add the time. I couldn't really think of anything else, but the agenda and the timeline were the two that I could immediately remember being different between having a project manager and not.
How about you, Alejandro? Oh,
Yeah, that agenda bit, that's really funny, because it reminds me of like, must have been like the third meeting that I set up my new job, and this leader responded to my meeting request, and they're like, what's the agenda? Don't send me, essentially it was like, from now on, please send an agenda for all the meetings. I was like, got it. Okay, cool. That's my job. So yeah, very important, and it makes a big difference. So I don't have a project manager. I have to do a lot of the project management responsibilities for my projects. So some of the things here for me, for like deadline and timeline, I do create like a buffer for my projects. Well, I got two different cycles. One is like, because I work on like programs. At the end of each quarter, I have like scheduled updates or maintenance cycles. So I always schedule like 3 weeks before the end of quarter is when I start like starting up my deadline. So I have one deadline 3 weeks out, like things need to be updated in the design doc, which is essentially like our curriculum in the back end. And then the following week is like deadline for like updates to the program. And then the next week is like change management, updating our stakeholders of like things that have what has changed, how to access things, training on any like use of new tools and stuff. So by the start of the next quarter, everything's kind of set up. They know how to what has changed. But there's also things that need to be changed or created or delivered off cycle. So if other projects come, job aids or training, whatever that can't wait to the end of the quarter. I also those also happen throughout the months, not just at the end of the quarter. But what the things that I do, strategies that have worked for me, is having kind of two different things. One is like a walking deck, or we call it our core deck, is where all our projects, essentially our project charters, go there on like 1-pagers or 2-pagers, where it's like all the basic information of our projects, our timelines, that is people facing. So if other folks want to know, hey, what's Alejandro working on? What are some of the strategic initiatives? They can go to that deck, and everyone in our organization has access to that deck. So they have like a bird's eye view to learn like, hey, what's happening in a different part of the organization. It helps like break down silos. And then the other thing is our collaborative workspace. So you have a project management tool called Reich. I invite everyone to that, so they can kind of see what I'm doing, what I'm working on, what's the status of things. So they can kind of essentially like they can kind of digitally look over my cubicle and be like, oh, that's what Alejandro's working on. And I could tag people and bring people in for a specific task to say, hey, I would love your perspective on this. And we can avoid having a meeting, but because they can just like read the description and give the 2 cents there. So those are two things that I do to help with project management. One is having something that's external facing, and another like an internal kind of workspace.
All right, Ken, to you on the project manager question, and then I think our last question of the night will be Hannah's that we'll get to after we talk about this question that we're on.
Sure. So we pretty much live and die using Monday. So it's a Monday board. So all of our projects, so we have several different teams, right, in different levels. So all of the separate teams have project boards on Monday. And you can kind of think if you take Addy and just that kind of process, they're kind of structured the same way, but they're not called that. So for analysis, it might be called plan or prepare, right? For design, it might be just this worded differently, but under each of those phases, we would have separate tasks. And of course, we have larger milestones, and then we have deadline dates and who's responsible for it. So we have a weekly internal team meeting where if we're assigned to a project, then we discuss the specific tasks, like what is due, what's late, if we're stuck on something, if we need help. And then I think it also depends on, since we're talking project management, if I'm the project manager or if someone else is. So this last project that I've been speaking of, it was me. Like I was the guy driving the train, doing the agendas, sending out the meeting recaps and kind of making sure everything was happening. But if we have a larger project where the entire team is supporting, then my boss, my director, she's the one who's kind of driving the train and setting things up. So we're kind of reporting to her. But yeah, I think that it's you don't necessarily. McKenzie was talking about agile and Kanban, so there's more structure. But I've found that like the 2 roles that I've been in, like you don't need like a PMP certification or anything like that, because sometimes it just doesn't fit, right? Because the projects are different and they have their own life. So it's just, you kind of have to like keep it simple, kind of keep to a simple process. And really just think logically of like what has to happen. And then you'll find that sometimes what you thought was going to happen won't, but something else did. So you need to do other things. So it kind of grows its own life a little bit. So that's going to kind of make your schedule fluctuate. But yeah, sometimes you're the project manager, sometimes you're not, is kind of what I found in my experience.
Yeah, I think that often, even I think that all IDs need project manager skills, because you have to at some point be that person who's like, this is the agenda for the meeting, this is how long this is going to take. Like there's always points where you have to step in and do it, but there's also times where this kind of goes to the next question, working together with other IDs or other people besides SMEs, other people who are working kind of directly. Maybe some of you have e-learning developers or graphic designers or other people on the team. I know my team, we have different learning experience designers, and there's like projects that I do by myself, but also projects that maybe I storyboarded it and pitched it, but then I have 4 other developers working on like different pieces of it that I have to check in with. So how often do you work with other instructional designers or developers to kind of create your solutions, or people outside of the subject matter experts and stakeholders who are more content developers on your team with you, technical writers, maybe too, things like that. So we'll do kind of a quick round robin because we're approaching our 8:30 here. What kind of people do you work with, and how frequently do you work with them, Alejandro?
Sorry about that. Yeah, so there's 2 other instructional designers on my onboarding team. They each have their own onboarding track. So I collaborate a lot with them to make sure our learning tracks are aligned and they kind of make sense all together. But we're very much each kind of creating our own content. So we do much of the development ourselves. Sometimes I do lean on someone else who has a stronger skill set in a specific software or a tool, but for the most part, I'm making my own. 2 weeks ago, I was able to hand something off to an intern, and that was very nice because it was like, hey, I scoped the thing out, all it needs to happen now is this thing needs to be created in Storyline, and I was able to like give it to the intern, and he's like, cool, I'll do it in a couple of weeks. I was like, sick. That opens up my capacity for other things. So that was very nice. I'm looking forward for more of that, but for the most part, I'm doing a lot of my development at the moment.
All right, how about you, Ken?
So I would say collaboration happens all the time, even in my previous position, but it depends on the person's strength because you have different flavors of instructional designers. So we have one person who's really good at project management, as well as she has a graphic design background. We have someone who comes from the field, so came from the restaurant. So she knows the people, the culture, how things really work. And then we have someone else who's kind of a little more senior, who's, got the overall broad knowledge. And I'm kind of like a people person, relationship builder, like the front end analysis design type of guy. So we all crosstalk, we sit together. Sometimes we're working on the same project, but usually if we have a question or want to bounce ideas off of, we either message each other on Teams, or we just turn around in the chair and like, hey, what do you think about this? And then we just start spitballing ideas.
Awesome. Tyler, what about you?
Yep. So we're all assigned our own projects, and then if we feel like we need help, we may ask our boss, our manager, hey, I need help. And I think someone's already said it, a lot of specialties come into play. So mine is like Storyline. So I've built a lot of Storyline stuff for other people's projects. And then there's graphic designers, people that can design graphics for me, because that's not my strong suit. And so I think it happens. It's you having to reach out though. Like they're not going to just say, oh, you get 3 developers. It's usually like, do you need help? And so I'd say that's the biggest thing, is always ask for help if you think you need it.
And then McKenzie, what about on your software?
Yeah, so my team, there's 7 IDs. We each have our own product line. So we are responsible for developing all the training for that product. That being said, we are super collaborative in other ways. Like we're always working together to make the content more accessible, figure out new functionality in the LMS. We have multiple rounds of review, so we always review each other's work and give each other lots of feedback. So even though I'm developing solo, we're still collaborating behind the scenes.
I think that review piece is such a good call out too, because that is like every company has their own review cycle, but most companies will have a review cycle, hopefully. And that's also part of the process. And maybe enough for a whole webinar of its own, to be honest, when we get into like quality issue. I just wanted to say thank you for everybody for joining us, and our panel especially, and then give you each kind of a moment or two to see where people could connect with you, find you, etc. And then we'll kind of say goodnight because we've reached our 8:30 time. And I'm sorry, my internet connection has been so capricious tonight. Alejandro, where can people find you, connect with you, or should they not? You guys can also say, don't ever reach out to me, please. I don't want to hear from you if that's the case.
No, feel free to connect with me. I'm pretty friendly. I'll just drop my LinkedIn, and that's probably the best spot to find me. It's in the chat. Reach out. Happy to talk, to connect, answer questions. My favorite saying from my mentor teacher from a previous life is one hand reaches back, one hand reaches forward. So I may be a couple of steps ahead of other folks. Happy to share any wisdom that I have, because I'm still getting so much help from other folks who are just a couple of steps ahead of me. So it's all a community. I'm happy to help out and support however I can.
Awesome. Ken, what about you? Where can people reach out to you? Anything you want to talk about you're doing or anything like that?
Absolutely. So LinkedIn, that's probably the starting point. Definitely had conversations in the past with all kinds of different people. I reach out to people to ask them questions, so feel free to reach out and connect. I'd be happy to help anyone. And thank you, Alison, and everyone for joining, and Alison for inviting me. It's been great. So appreciate it.
Oh, also kind of a call out while Ken is, we're on Ken's section here. Ken is helping Lane run a case study group. So if you find him on LinkedIn, or Lane, oh God, I forget her last name, but there's a really fun case study group we're doing monthly where we're looking at terrible situation. Well, the last one was a terrible situation. Maybe the next case study will be good. But situations and how people could get out of them, or how they could work their magic as an ID. And I think that might be helpful to some of our audience as well. McKenzie is one of our community managers, so you can find her there too. But what else?
Yep.
Where else can people reach out to you?
Feel free to add me on LinkedIn. And yeah, I'm very active in the TPLD group. So you can pop by there if you have questions, you want to chat, get support from the group. I met someone through TPLD who ended up putting in a good word and got me an interview at my current job. So I'd say it's like a great network. Everyone is really welcoming and supportive.
And McKenzie also has a blog. You have a blog that you do like pretty.
I'll drop it in the chat. Thanks, Alison.
You can find me on LinkedIn. I know Alison's sound went out.
My sound went out again. All right. And Tyler says you can find him on LinkedIn. Like every day too, I was talking with Alejandro, who was in here first, and talking about how I invited everybody. And I was like, Tyler wasn't in the TPLD group before. I think you are now, but I just see him on LinkedIn all the time because his posts are always interesting. So almost every day, Tyler has a brilliant post on LinkedIn that I'm like, that is a good point. That's a really interesting question. Like, it's such a joy.